On the podcast known as
Trapped Under Plastic, the only podcast on YouTube that isn't sponsored by Games Workshop or Squarespace.
Are there podcasts sponsored by Games Workshop?
I don't think this person's ever listened to a podcast before because I don't know if Games Workshop sponsors anybody.
I don't think GW is giving anyone money.
Yeah. See, here's the cold hard truth is they don't spend any money on anything. They send people models, which that's great. When they send me models, I'm not mad. I'm happy. But models don't innately feed my dog and pay.
What if your dog ate those models, though?
Yeah, if he was like a plastic eating dog and he shits out sprue goo.
That would be amazing.
That's a scare right there. But no, unfortunately he doesn't. So, but Squarespace was right on. Now, if you just had like Raid Shadow Legends, although that's kind of a meme at this point because I don't see them advertising like they used to.
I feel like I've seen them on Zorp's videos every now and then, but not for a bit. But I feel like Raid Shadow Legends has like graduated into memedom now.
Yeah.
And now it's like not that big of a deal to get sponsored by them because like every other large company is like putting out just as many ads as them.
Yeah, Squarespace is a big one. Like Skillshare is one. There's a bunch of that are like they work in like these rotations where they do a bunch of ads and you see them all over the place. Like the Helix mattress shit.
Oh yeah,
I want to get one of those. I told Trigby, I was like, Trigby, can you get me the Helix mattress? I need a new mattress.
He actually contacted me with a sponsorship for December for one of those things, but I don't know what to do with a mattress. I don't necessarily need one, so I don't know if I'm going to take it.
There's something cool in the studio you could do with it.
I don't know if there's space for like a fucking mattress in here.
No, like you put like a fancy blanket over it, and then you build like little like padded backs to it, and it's a giant square couch.
Oh, okay.
You
A
know?
little chilling. Get the projector out that we use for the class and
Yeah,
see some
exactly.
movies. Yeah.
Watch some movie time. I mean, you could just like staple it to your ceiling as sound dampening.
That would probably work really well. Yeah.
Come on.
All right.
That's what we talk about. Let's talk about Preamble Ramble.
Let's do it. It's Halloween. Well, yesterday was Halloween, and it was fucking so cold yesterday.
Dude, you got snow up here.
Yes, it was snowing. Like it was the day before, it was like 75 degrees Fahrenheit. And then the next day it was like 30 and it was snowing.
Yes. This is Halloween. This is fucking Midwest Halloween in a nutshell. It feels like it's July until the day before Halloween.
Yeah.
And then it's like shitty, windy, cold as fuck.
Dude,
on Halloween.
I feel bad for all those kids that were out trick-or-treating.
Feel bad for me. I was doing that.
Oh shit. Yeah, that sucks.
I was but luckily my daughter dressed up as Hermione.
Nice.
Specifically the scene where they're pulling the mandrakes out of the pots and they have to wear these big poofy earmuffs to prevent the mandrake screams.
Yes.
So she had a plushy mandrake and she had her earmuffs and she had like the vest, the tie, the shirt, the long skirt. She got the heavy duty tights and the big wool robe. So she was fine.
Yeah.
She knew how to prep her costume for Minnesota Halloween weather. So the other kids, her cousins, they just ran the whole time to try to keep warm, which is actually a sound idea.
Yeah, that might have worked.
And then you just like pop a Reese's in between each house to give yourself the sugar rush, and then you just go to the next one.
There you go.
That's it. But yeah, it was fucking cold. But Halloween's so great, man. Now I got candy though. Like I hid the candy from myself before Halloween.
How does that work? How do you hide something from yourself? You got one of those like Men in Black style like memory forgetters. Like all right, I'm gonna take a selfie with this thing. It's like, oh, what?
That would work. I feel like that happens to me every night I go to bed because I can't wake up in the morning. I forget really important shit.
That happens at the end of every podcast. At the end, I think we flash ourselves and then forget what we said.
We don't remember at all.
No.
'Cause I was listening to the last podcast for it rolled over when I was painting this week and into our podcast site. Like I let it roll for like 15, 20 minutes. I was like, I don't remember any of this shit. This show is pretty funny actually.
Yeah, not too bad.
But yeah, so what I did is I hid it somewhere where I don't usually hide stuff. Because like you have your Christmas present hiding stuff, your anniversary present hiding stuff for your spouse. I didn't hide it there. I hid it in a room that I don't go in that often because it's filled with my wife and daughter's craft shit. So I just never go in there. I threw it in there somewhere, and then I threw myself down the stairs.
Okay.
And that way,
Cause a little memory loss, maybe
Right.
concussion.
when I think back to that day, I think back of the trauma of falling downstairs.
Oh, okay. You
I don't think
associate
about that.
the candy with pain.
But then, because we go trick-or-treating, I just left a giant bowl on our steps.
I did the same.
And here's the thing. Who are these kids that aren't taking massive handfuls? I came back, and there was like 3 pieces gone.
Okay, see, I had the exact opposite situation. I put a big bowl of candy out. I figured it's cold outside. You know, this is going to be like 3/4 full when like the evening is over. No, it was all gone. Those motherfuckers took it all. And I was salty. I was like, I want some candy for myself.
Yeah, you can't. That's a risky move. That was every piece of candy you owned?
Yeah, every single one. It's all gone.
Man, that's no bueno. I'd keep a couple off to the side for myself.
Just store some for yourself.
Right. Yeah, you just got some ragavans going around roaming your neighborhood, just stealing by the handful. For all you know,
You were just promoting that behavior, though.
for all you know, it was one group of kids.
I know. They just came through and looted me, dude.
Yeah,
ransacked.
No, but my little nephews did that because there's a couple of houses down there that did that, and they were like, they would keep taking handfuls until I told them to stop.
Oh my god, dude.
At 3 handfuls, I was like,
Okay,
how far are they going to go? I let it keep going. At 5 handfuls, I was like, all right, that's enough, boys. Yeah. Now give me the dad tax. Yeah. I'm not your dad. Your dad's not here. Suck it. You got to pay me. I'm a dad. Yes. Dad tax applies. So I got some frozen ass high chews that almost broke my teeth out.
Oh my gosh.
I put it in my mouth because I'm like, hey, it's a high chew. It's delicious and chewy. It was frozen. Yes. So that's my lesson of the day. Don't just immediately chew into a frozen high chew. Yeah.
Watch any spooky movies for the holiday season?
You know, I didn't, but I watched I think we talked about in the last episode of the movies I watched recently. This week was a lot of editing, so I did not get to watch any of my usual movies. We're watching Only Murders in the Building on TV on Wednesday nights.
Okay.
And I guess that's kind of spooky.
Yeah,
it's
kind
a
of
murder mystery, but it's not really scary. How about you? Did you watch anything good?
I struggled to find horror movies that my wife will enjoy because she's not a fan of the horror genre, but we did find a couple. One we watched was Happy Death Day, which is like Groundhog Day meets a slasher film.
Oh.
You keep reliving the same day and dying viciously at the end of it until you figure some way to get out of the loop.
That's a nice premise.
And it was pretty good. It was good wife material for a horror movie. It wasn't too spooky, but it still kind of rid that line of some comedy, some horror elements.
Right.
And then also we watched the classic 90s Addams Family movie.
Oh, right.
Fucking peak family horror. I love that. And then we wanted to watch the Wednesday Netflix TV show.
Is that good? I heard it's pretty good, but
it's pretty good. There's some like kind of weird story moments and like kind of convenient things that just happen to move the plot along, but otherwise it's pretty fucking cool.
You know, I'd say that I didn't watch a movie, but I did go to a Halloween play last weekend.
Okay. Headless Horseman?
No, it was Dracula, a comedy of blood, I believe is a funny one. It's a little bit of a Monty Python-esque, written a little bit over the top. And the local theater in Rochester, shout out to the Rochester Civic Theaters, they kind of get some bangers now and again. And the guy who played Dracula, he was he played it kind of like what's the sexy vampire movie?
Oh, I have no idea.
Like the sequel, I can only think of the sequel. Twilight.
Oh,
he played like a Twilight.
Sexy vampire movie?
Yeah, well, they're all just kind of, and he even like the way he like carried himself was very like sexy vampire, and he was always very sultry and talking. He's like, oh yes, very much want to have you over for dinner. Funny joke insert here. Blah. Yeah. So it was okay, but it was funny. We had some drinky poos before and some drinky poos at the show, and that made it better.
There you go.
But yeah,
surprisingly, they made it a little bit better.
I got my culture in and my vampire in.
Okay.
Boom. Headshot. What else? I want to talk about Valbjorn. You had Valbjorn here.
I did, yes. Valbjorn came over and taught a class in my studio to 7 students. I think it was supposed to be 8 total, but we had 1 seat left. And he taught about weapon creation, conversion, how to use putty, and I worked really well. They all sat at the big gaming table, and I brought the monitor down so that Valbjorn could sit at my desk and Hobby there, and then there was a camera on him, and then they could all see on the monitor what he was doing.
That's a pretty nice setup, dude.
Yeah, and had big light above, so no one needed to bring their own lights or anything. And yeah, it was Saturday, Sunday. I think it was 10 to 4 each day. And they went and ate somewhere in St. Paul nearby, and everyone had good things to say. There were a couple small things that I might fix for a future class, but otherwise it worked out pretty well.
I feel like I should have taken that last 8th seat because my video for this week was I made a fucking sword out of plastic card. And I used Milliput, epoxy sculpt, and green stuff on this conversion. And at one point I was like, damn, this kind of lined up where if the Valbjorn class would have been the week before, it would have been perfect timing for me then immediately doing this afterwards.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I probably did everything wrong, but that's okay. That's okay.
Yeah, we made a video together where we sat down and he like basically gave me the abridged version of the class. We made an axe head together out of Tamiya Quick Type, which is like a type of putty.
Oh, I bought that stuff. Is it that fancy little like orange stuff?
It's orange, and it's like a combination of milliput and green stuff in that it has a sticky, tacky quality to it, but it also, once fully cured, is like a stone and can be sanded
And carved
like
away from.
really nicely. And so I was able to get like a sharp bevel edge to the axe and like make really interesting curves and shapes. It was super satisfying to use.
Oh man, I bought some of that stuff. I should have. I didn't even take it out of the drawer. Goddamn. Yeah. So it's the one thing that I learned, and I'm kind of feeling a little bit justified that I kind of went through the process of conversion for this guy, was that there's a level to it that I think we often talk about, the addition. Kit bashing and customizing through addition, and that is through like adding green stuff details and sculpting cloaks as addition. But I actually think that one of the more important aspects of it that's often not talked about is the subtraction, the carving away, treating it like a woodworking project. And it sounds like that's the important part of you making that axe head, is the subtraction of the rough shape into a refined shape.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really interesting. Okay, so I stumbled on that myself, and I was right the whole time.
The whole time. But yeah, we did talk about that in the video. That they're like even when you zoom into sculpting an individual part, it's like you could make the rough shape of this, let it cure, and then sand out the fine shape. Or there are some people that just get the finished result immediately with green stuff and like smoothing it with like lotion and color shapers and stuff like that. There's like two approaches you can take. And we took the approach of rough shape and then sanding it to get a nice sharp thing. Right. I should go get those axe heads, actually. I want to show you them. They're really cool.
Okay. All right. While Scott gets the axe heads, I'm going to talk about my recent gaming realization. And that is co-op games are better than versus games, just in general. I just think that I say this as somebody who regularly plays Magic the Gathering, which is against other people, and you are fighting them to the magical death via cards. But that's because that is a well-supported, well-balanced 30 years of experience game, and I find that I easily fall into this death spiral of noticing the cracks in games that have a lot of gray zones, specifically when you're dealing with things that are movement based that aren't on a computerized grid that you cannot.
Are you referring to miniature war games?
Yeah, I struggle that my favorite ways to play games that have miniatures are cooperative. Like all the fun miniature board games that I play that are so much depth, so much like hours that you can sink into them. Cooperative. Enjoy them more. All my D&D stuff with complex combat systems, all on a grid based, all on using miniatures. Cooperative. Now, you could say, well, the DM's against you, but they're not really. If they're a good DM, they're not against you. They're there to push the story along and put roadblocks in your path to keep the amount of difficulty, ebbing and flowing. So it's interesting, doesn't get boring. But like, it's a personal thing. I just find that's like competitive John is a problem. Okay,
And not just for him, for everyone around him.
everyone involved. John, and I don't like who I become sometimes. And I feel like that he just like, I let him out of the fucking bottle and I can't put him back in. It's bad. It's bad for like, I get in a bad mood. We saw this at fucking VinciCon for playtesting his stupid game. I got so fucking mad. I'm like, Vince, this isn't balanced. This is dumb. I don't like this. This is wrong, whatever. And that doesn't mean it was wrong or right. I was right. It was wrong. But that's neither here nor there. They were all tweaks. That's part of playtesting is identifying things that you can tweak and you can make the game tighter or whatever.
Right.
But it just put me in a shitty mood.
But also, that scenario did end very, very close. Very close. It could have gone either way.
That's just because Ben and I are amazing gamers.
That's true.
Really. That was really what it was.
Yeah.
And that's the flip side. There's the plus side of Tryhard John mode is like, I was not going to roll over when the cards were stacked against us. We were going to fight tooth and nail, try to scrap this thing out. Scrappy crappy for the win, all right?
Yeah.
That's what we were. But
it didn't fucking matter.
And it didn't matter. We still lost. We still lost. So I just got to get in a pissy mood. But when I'm playing fun games with other people and we're cooperative, I had so much fun. I play tested Ben's game. That was cooperative. We had a fucking blast. It was like, Ben, this needs to be made. This is so much fucking fun. And when I'm just like playing games with friends instead of against friends, people don't get mad. And if you get mad, you're getting mad at this invisible game developer. And you can change things if you're like, that doesn't seem right. We've played this game 4 times now, and we're playing it together, and that just seems right. Let's check the forums. Let's fucking check Reddit. Does anyone else have this problem? It looks like it. No, it's just kind of a thing. Okay, well, we can make the tweaks, or we can just understand that's a difficult part of the game. I think it's too many years of playing poker competitively, Magic competitively, and going back to when I was a kid in sports and stuff and through college and sports, I'm just like, when I'm competitive, I'm cutthroat. And I get that way with competitive miniature painting too. But the good thing about that is I can be the asshole in my own painting studio. And by the time we go to an actual event, like,
you've expelled it all.
I mean, I've expelled it all until I don't win. And then I'm like, but that fades too. And actually, the more, I think it's healthier for me, the more that I've done the competing, the more that I've participated in Golden Demon. And we had a conversation of all of us in the Painting Wizards group chat that we have this week, where I find myself trying to, in my own head, I'm trying to be a voice of reason, but it probably comes across as like me being pro Golden Demon in our chats.
It sometimes does, but then other times you do like dial it back and like have valuable criticisms about Golden Demon as well. So I see both things.
Yeah, I kind of to a point where I've run the gauntlet a couple times now, 3 times, and every time I thought I had a good chance to win, which is a scary place to be because then you get your own hopes up. And then I was dashed 2 out of those 3 times. And in hindsight, like rightly so, I've seen places to grow. I've seen things I didn't do well, that kind of thing. But I've done it enough times now where I've come to a point of understanding the truth of what the thing is. And you can either be mad at the truth of what a thing is, or you can recognize it for what it is and find a way to give yourself the best chances, but understand that's why it's so exclusive.
And you can say that all you want, but then when you lose,
yes, of course,
it's still hard to be reasonable at that time,
yeah.
you know?
But if you're going to put yourself in a position to actually go through the triathlon that is painting a piece for Golden Demon, you have to separate yourself from the fact that you might be the one that's on the outside looking in, that there's no possible way the judges could overlook yours to set yourself up for a position. Because if you don't do that, you're going to be miserable through the whole painting process, and you're probably not going to even complete it, or you're just going to be so negative about the whole process. You have to assume that you are painting to a level of there's no way they couldn't notice mine. And that's biased, and that may not be the reality of things, but you have to put yourself in that mindset. And that's kind of why I've been more confrontational, specifically with Vince lately and his points, because I'm like, I have to be in the mindset of that's not going to be me. I'm not going to allow that to be me, even though that's not how reality works.
Anyways, I like co-op games too. No, I'm just kidding. This is not about Golden Demon. I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense. I'm a little bit confused on who the person is you're trying to avoid. The person that gets salty about losing and doesn't see that there's a path forward. Is that the kind of person you were trying to avoid being?
Yeah.
Like,
just
this is not winnable. It's all luck.
Yeah, games. Yeah, I don't want to be that. Well, I also find that like oftentimes, especially in games that take a amount of time to play.
I'm asking about Golden Demon.
Oh, Golden Demon.
Yeah.
Okay.
When it comes to Golden Demon, who's the person you're trying to avoid?
I'm trying to avoid being the person that's angry at what Golden Demon is. I'm trying to be the person that acknowledges what it is and all its faults, but realizing that is what it is and do my best given that framework.
Sure. That's a pretty healthy way to look at it, I think.
Yeah. And that you have to cushion yourself for the fall. And actually a person that I learned this from, I first had the realization of this, was Andy Wardle. I had a conversation with him last year, and it was very enlightening how his outlook on Golden Demon is. Now, granted, the dude's won the Slayer sword, so he can be a little bit more like, cushioned in his approach to it. But he's like, at any time, you can't set yourself up for a big fall. All you can do is do your best and be strategic in how you set yourself up to get the finished model. And once it's there, you have to be open to the possibilities that anything can happen. And part of that is the excitement and the buzz around what it is. Part of that is what is so intoxicating about Golden Demon, is that it's not all written as soon as all the pieces are in the case. The story is not written then. And that level of energy and nervousness and all that is part of the journey. And sometimes you're not going to do it. Sometimes you're not going to win, even though it might have been way better than the piece you did last year that did win. It's just, that's part of the gauntlet you run. And if you can accept that that's what it is and you still have the drive to do it, then you'll have a much more positive experience. And I was like, I never thought about it that way. And just being open to that fact it's why it's so precious if you do get one, because it's so fucking hard to do. So,
okay.
Anyway.
Regarding co-op and competitive games, I find myself trying to change the way I think and behave while playing competitive games, but I constantly fail doing it.
Yeah.
But I want to be the kind of person that can play a competitive game casually and not be emotionally invested. And so I keep trying. I mean, I play competitive games literally all the time, so there's always opportunity to try to help. Now, obviously, what helps a lot is having an opponent who's not super invested in competitive. We said that before in the past. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's getting better and better. It also helps to play games that I'm not familiar with or good at.
Yeah.
Because then, like, there's less of this preconceived notion that I have to be good at it and I have to, like, impress this person that I'm playing against or show them that I know what I'm doing. Even if I'm losing, I want to be able to display that I have some grasp on strategy. But I think it's a long process.
It is. It is a lifetime of learning.
Yeah.
And I am not mature, so I really struggle with that. I struggle. I say it. It all sounds good. I am 100% on board. I believe every single thing and want that to be true. But at some point in the game, it's entirely likely that some switch is going to be flipped.
Yeah.
And then I just become Barbarian Rage John.
Yeah.
And I don't like that. I don't like that person. I do competitive, versus games.
Yeah.
That I don't have that in. And that's every time there's a new Magic set out and they do a Magic pre-release and people come together and you're playing with the cards for the first time and you're building your decks and you're playing games, I can be pretty laid back through all of those because most of the people there are just like, they're excited. They don't play a ton. Some of them are quite good players. Some of them are, you kind of suss out your opponent is and they're just excited. This is the one time they go and get together outside of their regular friend group to play. And there's 40 some people there. And like, I can get through all of those. Most of those I get through and I don't get huffy about stuff. And so it's like, I just need to, whatever I'm doing there, I just need to do that.
Are you winning there mostly?
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, it's easy.
So just win all the time, and I think you'll be better.
I'm a much more gracious opponent if you let me win.
That's awesome.
Yeah, but I start out every match like very like I like to talk a lot when I play, and a lot of people don't, and that's fine. I'll talk to strangers. We talk about stuff, and I make jokes about stuff, and we have fun, and that gets us in a good mood because you got to play best of 3. You're playing 3 games unless someone sweeps, and you just set a good tone for us having fun together. But if I'm doing that or whatever, and the other person is serious, and that usually means they're good, and then they're not in for the having fun conversation with me, and they clam up, then I fucking clam up.
I think that's reasonable.
And then I just kick her into high gear and be like, you should have laughed at my jokes, motherfucker.
Oh, my God.
I'm a dick. All right.
I find that what helps me a lot is understanding that this is not the this is not the last time that I'm going to be playing a competitive game.
Yeah.
It's like when my wife, like we want to eat somewhere, I'm like, let's try something new. And she's kind of like, I don't know if I want to try something new. It's like, Amber, we eat 80,000 meals in our lifetime. Not every single one needs to be a banger. And it's like, oh, okay. I guess now that I have that perspective, now I can try out this weird Afghani restaurant.
Right.
And it's the same thing with gaming. It's like, I'm going to play so many games in my life. I don't need to fucking dominate every single time. I want to, but it's, there's just so many games. It's not going to happen. So that helps me a little bit when I kind of frame it like that.
Yeah. I think also a level of like video game kind of the community or the what video games have become, especially for competitive video games, is the quick turnaround and being in a queue and getting into a game, and you can be sweaty nerd gamer that's super competitive. And I don't ever participate in voice chat, but like just that more toxic thing is influenced a bit of the tabletop gaming thing. Is like it's so easy to turn around and get to a new game and you be pissed off about why you lost and whatever in a video game, because you can just re-queue up and whatever. If you died, you died. Okay, I can be pissed off and I can just play another game. But there's so much more weight to a tabletop game.
Yeah.
It takes 3 hours to lose horribly in a game of Warhammer, and no one wants that.
No one wants that.
No one wants that. Let's talk about what we painted, since I've been talking for way too long. Preamble Ramble.
Let's do it.
You painted a building.
I painted a building, but we'll talk about the axes first. This is my axe and Valbjorn's axe.
You want me to check if I can say whose is whose?
Oh, yeah, sure. Go for it. I always like doing that. So, yeah, he came over and he showed me how to essentially shape a piece of brass into a nice square stock, and then how to sculpt a axe head on top of it and how to shape it, make it look nice and sharp, add in interesting curves, really subtle shapes, but also really aggressive shapes. Taught me about files and how I also viewed it in this way, but files can be viewed as kind of like a brute weapon, not very like detailed, but he showed me how to like use files in a very delicate way to get really subtle shapes and stuff like that. And he is an incredibly detail-focused person. He really cares about the small minutia. So he was commenting on the way I was holding the sanding sponge and the direction that I was moving the file and the angle that I was holding it at. And so he was like really getting down into the weeds with me, which I think is really helpful for like a beginner to really kind of like get good results sooner, is to kind of get those things you always forget about as a pro, like down right away. And they were really helpful, honestly.
That's really important, because you're dealing with such tiny things, and you're not just like painting a tiny thing. You are having to craft every single detail, and you kind of realize how much thought is put into how much a curve of a certain surface is, and how straight this edge is, and where does it line up on the haft of the, where the blade meets the haft.
He was talking about all those things. He was talking about all of that. And also, regarding that, how sharp the edges are, like you want a slight round over on those edges so that they're nicer to paint. If it's like super sharp, not as nice to paint. And so like there's so many little details that I'm sure I wasn't thinking about. But the couple that he mentioned, it was like kind of like it was good. It was an amazing experience, because I didn't know how to do that beforehand. But after, I feel like super empowered to do it again, because I was like, I kind of was like, okay, this is actually not that hard. Like the things he was telling me all made sense. I applied them and it worked. I think that was a pretty satisfying little axe head there.
I think they're both good.
Thank you.
I think that whichever one is yours, it's like, damn, you could put that on a model right now and it would, I mean, you would paint it up and you wouldn't even know.
Yeah.
If I had to guess, it's tough. I thought for sure I knew exactly which one it was, but then the other one, the one that I think is yours, actually has a nicer squared edge where it meets the haft and the top of where that goes through. Mm-hmm. That's actually nicer. But I think the rounder, almost half moon curve on the bottom edge of the blade looks like a more experienced person, and their blade edge is slightly more defined. So I would, but I mean, I could be wrong. You could just have beaten him on your first try.
I don't think I beat him.
Okay, this is the one I think is yours. And this is the one I think is Val Bjorn's. You might need to have to put them side by side to know.
Okay, you were wrong. This one's mine. This one's his.
Oh, well, you beat him.
So yeah, he does have more of an angled approach, but you are right. I intentionally, so where the axe head meets the handle is on an angle. It's not just 90 degrees. And then I wanted to continue that curve around to the other to the top of the axe head. So that was intentional. That was actually part of his advice, actually.
Yeah, which is great. I think you have a very satisfying curve on the underside of that blade.
Yes,
and that's really, really nice. His might be even like a more historically accurate depiction of,
I think so,
of a Viking's axe.
I think so,
because that blade edge does go down further than the curve of the undercurve meets, and then that curve goes then straight and follows the blade edge, which in my vast Viking hatchet experience, I believe his is more historically accurate.
I think also like the profile of it is just way cleaner and like way sharper and just like really nice and intentional. I think they're both great though, and I am like excited to like sculpt some dark Eldar segmented armor and stuff like that, because it just like stuff we use to me in QuickType just sands so nicely and so gets so sharp so easily.
But that's the thing with the green stuff though. Why green stuff works so well too is like you can let it cure for 15 minutes and then you can get really defined crisp shapes.
Never done that before.
Yeah, and place them. I did that in a number of spots on this guy because it's like it's easier to do that because the almost gummy texture to it where it can wrap around and it can conform while still mostly holding its shape pretty well.
Speaking of, let's get into what you painted.
I painted this samurai. I made up my own faction for Warhammer because I'm sick of their lackluster factions. No, I've always wanted a fucking samurai faction.
When I saw you making this sword blade in the video, I was like, that is such a big fuck off katana.
Right, yeah.
It's taller than him. The blade is taller than him.
Yeah.
But it doesn't feel wrong because it's like kind of a fantasy, like kind of a setting. But it is, when you hold it in your hand, it's big.
Yeah. It's technically an odachi. You know, odachi is a two-handed katana.
Oh, okay.
And so to lean into the Viking aesthetic of like they're a wanderer kind of noble warriors, right? And then they had seen some shit and they got to be able to live off the land and go into harsh climates and environments to root out evil. I've made all the lore. Don't worry about it. Okay. And so as part of that, they're going to have some level of elegance in their weaponry, but there's also going to be a level of brutality as well. And so that came to fit. The reason why it's the length that it is the original hands and pommel and grip of that sword. When I cut the blade off, I measured the length of the original blade, and that blade is the same length.
Yeah, I saw you marking it.
Yeah, so I wanted it to be, the right scale instead of just kind of like winging it what I think is the right scale. When this whole model was originally done by GW, that's the scale they used, and it seemed to work. So I'm like, I'm not going to second guess that, but I probably would cut off a 1/4 inch of that, and it would still work. But
yeah, maybe. I don't think it doesn't work right now. I didn't finish the video, but I saw you shaving in the bevel and like
instead of using sanding.
Well, yeah, but it was just very satisfying.
Yeah,
like you were like, whing, like you were like sharpening it. It looked so cool.
Yeah. Well, my thought on that was like, I want to cut to get the general edge, and then I go through and sand it smooth so it's universal, because you can't cut at that angle and make it the same. I thought about building a tool because you could certainly build a
like
tool
a knife sharpening tool, kind of.
that's on an angle, and you would just push your. You could put like a razor blade on, so you could change the angle, and you could just push your thing through on a guide, and it would have a universal cut through.
Yeah.
But because this is also a curved blade, suddenly I would spend a day building that tool, and it still wouldn't work, and I'd probably fucking cut the tips of my fingers. So
No, this definitely was a better solution, I think. I didn't see you filing it in the video yet, but yeah, cutting it, and then I mean, it seems the thing that's hardest with, I think, the bevel of a miniature sword blade is making sure that it's a consistent width the entire time.
Yes.
Or consistent enough, you know?
Yes.
And I can't tell that it's getting like wider or more narrow at any point. And you made it big enough to be able to paint on it, you know?
Yeah.
Have different reflections than on the main flat part of the sword. So I think you're achieving it, definitely.
yeah, I have found that when I did more kit bashing and creating of stuff when I was earlier on in my painting journey, that like I didn't take into account the painting side of it when I did the creation of it, and that can end up causing you to have failures because it will it doesn't look as good, even though when the model before it was primed still looks good, is because you haven't set yourself up for success in the painting side. And so that I did try to do that, and then take advantage of actually painting it differently on the blade edge, so you could see it easier, and trying to get that edge highlight where the blade meets the flat. So
yeah, this model's fucking sick. I already said that in our Facebook group, but like, it looks like a model. It doesn't look like a kit bash. It looks like a thing that definitely exists in the Warhammer world. It's painted really nicely. I really like the turquoise. I don't know what you call it. It's like dinosaur back almost, scaly. You know,
I think it's some. It looks to me like it was from the like a Saurus warrior from, you know, the whatever the lizard faction is.
Seraphon.
Seraphon, there it is. And so I had the main colors of red on the shoulders, and then I realized I hadn't thought of color scheme at all. And so I'm like, oh, shit. So then I'm like, I'm just going to use some different variations of greens more subtly across the model to just give a complementary color scheme, and just go with that because I have a couple of different metallics I wanted to do in the model. And I don't think the color scheme is identifiably strong like so many of Games Workshop faction color schemes are. But I also don't mind that he feels a little bit more subdued in the pushing of certain colors.
Yeah, talk to me about these red shoulders, because you're hiding them like they're kind of
Metallic.
NMM, but you're not like going so hardcore down that route.
Right, because I wanted it to be a true red, and I wanted it to feel almost like when you have a lot of these are steel plates or even leather plates from like feudal Japan, and they're not super shiny, but they aren't a matte finish either. So I wanted there to be some reflections, and I also wanted to be a true red and not push up to a pink or an orange. And so in order to do that, I decided I needed to go darker to create the shadows in a series of steps where you can see it leads your eye to believe there's a reflection, right? Because there's kind of layers of a darker shadow and then a thinner shadow as you move around. And that allowed me to then just move up to red instead of having to push over the top to go from a mid-tone red as your shadow. And that's where you're gonna get yourself into trouble.
Yeah.
And then I did do some scratchy highlights with like an off-white with a little bit of red mixed in, so it did kind of look like a pink. And then I glazed that Mephiston red back over the top.
Oh, okay.
So you get a little bit of detail there. The other problem is he's got those little like stitches.
On the shoulders?
On the shoulders. So it made it very hard to actually do too much work on the edge highlighting.
Yeah.
And it also, because that stitch detail is there, it kind of visually creates static of whatever edge highlight you'd have. So I kept that fairly minimal. It does have an edge highlight, but it's not pushed to the level of GW box art typically are, because I used a lighter stitch color to define the shape.
Subtlety is a hard thing to do in the miniature world because you're constantly trying to exaggerate literally everything. So trying to paint something that's like kind of reflective but not really reflective is like really hard. It's like how much do I push this before it turns into metal and isn't leather anymore? So I commend you for going for that.
Yeah, but it was so fun. And what I realized is when I just had my eye, did some research on traditional Eastern aesthetic warrior garb, mostly from feudal Japan, but from a couple different areas and even going into Mongolia and that kind of thing, is that so many details across a wide variety of factions. They beg, borrow, and steal small details. Even though those details aren't a uniform thing across the whole army, and the army doesn't have an Eastern aesthetic in general. They'll just grab something. Like the Mashimono, which is the warrior flag that he's got over his back, which is, I think, really helps sell this. That's a bit from Lumineth Realm Lords that do not have Eastern aesthetic anywhere else in their army.
Oh, you mean that GW's armies steal things from all over?
Yes, okay. GW steals stuff. No, not traditional Asian aesthetic doesn't steal stuff. GW steals stuff, and they sprinkle it, which kind of, in my opinion, leads to some confusion or static in identifiable markers in many factions in Warhammer. And it's a great example to look at a Space Marine as a prime example of where they don't do that. They have very defined, universally pleasing aesthetic shapes and approach to things, and they don't bring in a bunch of random details to fill out interesting aspects of the army. And so then when you see it compared to other factions, you see it a lot in a lot of new Age of Sigmar factions or relaunching of Age of Sigmar factions, where they throw stuff in that it doesn't exactly line up with the main kind of, if there's a main bubble of this is what that faction is, they fall outside the bubble. And so, but it's also really fun to go searching for those bits too. Because I'm like, I bet I could do an entire, at least a Warcry warband, maybe even, not a full army but maybe, of like going through all these GW kits and taking all of their Eastern designs and then making something. Because my main goal with this was, I don't want it to look like a kit bashed version of an existing faction.
Yeah, and it doesn't. It looks very unique. I think what you did in your video is like a good thing for kit bashing because of what you're saying right now. You got out all of your possibilities, and like you didn't like limit it to like things that you thought thematically were appropriate. You kind of just got out like a lot of stuff. And then when you're like holding the bits in your hand, you're like, oh, that actually works.
Yeah.
Like when I kit bash this thing, I got out stuff for other factions that I didn't think were appropriate for like vampires or fantasy, but like when it's a small tiny little bit, it can add to the greater whole a lot more. And so I mean that makes a lot of sense, and I think you achieved the goal of it feeling like its own thing. I think
I'm pretty happy. Also, this is my character in our D&D campaigns, and I get to use him on the tabletop all the time too. So he's got a double, which is also the reason he's on a 32 mil base instead of a 40. He fits better on my grid.
If you had to map this character to a faction, what would you map it to?
An existing faction?
Yeah.
He'd be somewhere in Slaves to Darkness.
Okay, I figured.
Yeah. He'd be some kind of a badass hero that would lead all the droves of the little peon dudes that just have loincloths and rusty hatchets
and basket heads or whatever.
Yeah. He just sends them out and he just wades through and just cleaves them in twain. I also say, the spoiler for the end of the video, that through the entire video, I don't say Age of Sigmar. I say Warhammer. And I'm like, I never said this is Age of Sigmar. This is going to be fucking Space Samurai. All he does is fucking land on the planet and he cuts through Tau like fucking butter. Because that's it. He totally could be. He's from a more, a slightly more primitive planet. And they get on their fucking spaceships, and he drops down. He don't need this fancy armor. He slayed the beast of 1,000 souls. I mean,
whoa,
yeah, he is the wielder.
John Lord,
he's wielder of the Soul Eater. There's no robot that can stop him.
Okay,
that's it. 40K faction.
All right. For the other thing that I worked on this past week, I worked on some terrain. So I got an interesting sponsorship from a company called Snot Goblin Gaming. They made this modular terrain, which in my opinion is the best merger of like Warhammer and Lego that I've personally ever come across. It's for ruined buildings to create specifically L-shaped terrain or fully enclosed squares or rectangles. And there are, I think I counted 17 pieces in the kit. And once you kind of figure out what each piece is for, it's very easy to be creative with it and to make different types of buildings. There are limitations, which I go over in the video, mostly with like, if you want to go, you can't just do one wall high like that corner without there being connectors showing. I had to shave them off and sand it so you wouldn't see them. But like with a little bit of creativity and conversion, it's very simple to like take one of these, you know, a couple pieces of these like Lego bits and put together a pleasing ruined building. And if you want to hide some of those connectors, it's like very trivial to do so. So I really liked it as a way to kind of get a somewhat custom piece of terrain, and then customize it further for my setting, which in my case is going to be Age of Sigmar and Soulblight Gravelord and stuff like that.
Yeah, there's definitely a necromancy book up here and a little bat.
Oh yeah, a little bat. Yes, he's like, Wah! But like it has generic enough details to be fantasy or sci-fi. I love like the skulls and the swords. Like I feel it's very Soulblight, you know.
Yep, it could go either way.
But it could be Space Marine, right? It could totally be that as well.
100%. At a distance, I thought for sure it was 40K terrain, and then when I'm holding it, I'm like, oh no, this would fit in either. Actually, you could run it in either, and this could easily be like some kind of like a chaos kind of shrine that's going on there. That there could be some kind of a ritual to summon some demons too. Like it totally fits.
Absolutely. So yeah, it's a weird situation because on one hand, it's a sponsored video, a sponsored product, but on the other hand, I genuinely see the value in the product, and it does do what the tin says to the letter. Like they go together super well. The fit's very nice. They can pop apart. Some of the pieces come pre-painted if you want that. And the paint's like super fucking durable. Like I was trying to scratch out the paint with my thumbnail and I couldn't get it off.
Damn.
So for people who don't like painting terrain and want some modularity, like I can't think of a better option than this stuff.
This is pretty fucking sweet.
Yeah, I glued it all together because I don't.
Oh yeah, dude,
take it apart.
I mean, there is definitely an option where like you could batch paint all the separate pieces, and then you put like a varnish over them to try to keep them sturdy as possible, and then you could snap them together. But like,
I ain't doing that.
I mean, yeah, you're gonna end up when you're like, okay, I'm gonna play a game, I'm gonna snap some of these pieces together. You're gonna make one that looks like that anyway,
right?
You know, why not just have a couple of them?
But also, like you mentioned earlier, war games already takes so long to fucking play. I don't want to put together terrain as a part of that process, you know? You could do that, but not for me.
Yeah, our local 40K group, they shout out to Derek. They have this stuff that they do that it's like pop-up books that they 3D print.
Oh yeah, it was a sponsor.
No. It's actually 3D printed. Oh, FDM printer ones.
Oh shit. Okay.
Yeah, so they fold flat and then you turn them up and you go like, and they come out to 3D. And even like the walking plants and stuff, they pop up.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and so it's weird. It's because like 3D printers can do this weird shit where it's like they print it all in one piece, but then like you snap a couple of things off and then it's movable.
I've never seen that.
Oh, like if you ever go to like
a gear kind of.
You can do it with like gears. You can do it with like they have little toys, or it's like a toy lizard, but it's like all segmented, or a snake.
Okay, I can imagine that.
That's all printed in one thing, and then you just like snap as you like turn it, and it snaps off the little connector things, and then it's fully formable. It's not going to fall apart.
Wow, it's
what the terrain does, and so yeah, when they have their events and tournaments and stuff, he just has like one. Not that big tub, and it's like, yeah, that's 8 tables worth of terrain. And he's like, pick it up, put it apart, and they just like they did like a rattle can and then a zenithal and then some stuff. They do some wash and some pigments and stuff, and they just slap it back together, put it in there. He's like, I want this to be set up in 20 minutes the entire tournament. You know.
Yeah.
So
honestly, terrain is so satisfying to paint because it's like your miniatures base, but just like 20 times bigger, right? Like so little work really goes so far. Like I don't know. This is maybe like a day of work, and that was kind of it. So it was pretty simple to paint up quickly. That's all we painted. What did you paint? Let us know down in the comment section below, or on the Facebook group. We have a Facebook group for Trapped Under Plastic specifically. So if you want to hang out with other like-minded people, get some feedback on your pieces, share pictures of chicken tenders, hit up the Facebook group link down in the description or show notes below.
It's wild that to this day there's still at least, I don't know, a couple times a month, somebody posts a picture of canes and they say, it's like, finally got to try canes, and then they give their thoughts on canes.
I feel like we built it up to be something that it's not.
I know. But it is good.
It's good, but it's not like gourmet fried chicken tenders or something like that,
right.
which I think would be wrong anyways.
It's like we want to grab a quick lunch after the podcast, and it's like that or Long John Silver's.
I can't remember the last time I ate a Long John Silver's, dude.
It doesn't matter at this point.
We got Canes.
We went with the Canes, given those two options. All right, we're gonna get on to the main topic here, and this isn't a doozy. This might be a world's first for Trapped Under Plastic. Before recording this, we sat down together here and we wrote down stuff.
Yeah.
We walked through some things because this one requires a level of thought and planning and breaking down into steps for this. This question comes from Jonathan Retka. Discuss the levels of painters, because from what I've seen online, there is beginner and pro, and then everything in between is gray. Break that gray down into a value scale, please. And Jonathan, he gets double duty this week, because not only did he submit a question for us that we're going to have as our main topic, which you can do by being a patron of us, but also every episode, we also do a breakdown of a miniature critique by one of our patrons. And it just so happened that Jonathan's mini was picked for this. So you can also do that if you are a patron. So for those of you that are patrons, Trapped Under Plastic, thank you. You are what keep this podcast running. And if you're not, we'll put a link down below to the Patreon if you want to check out what's going on there and the cool rewards you get for joining us.
Also, Jonathan is the one who's responsible for making this sign behind us.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
So there's no nepotism here about why he picked his question at all.
It's actually a good question that resulted in a pretty interesting conversation that we had right before the podcast, which resulted in writing it all down and kind of figuring out a tier, like a progression. Like we came up with, we did define what a beginner was, we defined what a pro is, and then we figured out 3 approximate stages of intermediate and kind of how you can identify when you've achieved those level ups.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll go over that today.
All right. So first thing we're going to do is define beginner, because you need a universal standing point, a point of understanding for all bodies involved, meaning you, the listener, and us, the people that ended up creating the rest of the list. So
thank you for explaining that for us.
Yes. So beginner is defined as someone that copies what they see. There's not really a creative thought involved, and they're trying to grasp the fundamentals of painting, trying to get smooth base coats and painting within the lines.
Yeah, and painting within the lines means I don't want the skin color to get on the armor. It's not I'm trying to paint the nose and the eye and stuff like that. That's a bit more advanced, but just not having the various parts of the model, leak onto other parts.
Right. It is
very, very basic.
It is. You sit down, it's your very first model you've ever painted, you pick up a paintbrush. What is your goal right there, right? You may have never thought about painting a model before in your life. You've never seen these paints before. You're holding the thing, and where does your brain go to what I'm trying to achieve? And that is, I want to get the thing to be the color that I want it to be, and I don't want that color other places, And you're not thinking in more depth. You're not trying to think art, from an artistic level. Now, if you have a different background in artistry, that beginner level might change, but that just means you're going to be further up on our list, maybe from a starting point. But that's a basic beginner. So
yeah. And also one thing that we want to say is that these levels of intermediate probably undoubtedly follow our experience with learning how to paint miniatures. There might be some progression here that makes sense when it's done in a certain order, but you can do these things out of order and probably get away with it. So if you're noticing that you're like, oh, I don't meet some of the requirements for intermediate 1, but I do intermediate 3, that's okay. You're not broken. It's just it's how we learn how to paint. So.
Yeah, you didn't do it wrong. But also, maybe a question to ask yourself is if I'm doing a number of these or one of these intermediate 3 things, but I don't have all the intermediate 1 things, maybe that's something to go back and spend some time on, because typically how we label these, they kind of build off of each other, right? And so if you're jumping too far ahead, a lot of the things that will really give you a foundation to being good at this intermediate 3 thing were things that you were doing in 1 and 2. And so you'll make your life easier by vaguely following this. So do it the way we say, or you're wrong.
Speaking of, we'll kick off right now with intermediate level 1, which I define as having a high focus on technique, about execution. So when you first start getting into miniature painting, you want to build up your tool set of skills. And there are a lot of skills that are building blocks: layering, dry brushing, edge highlighting, wet blending, glazing, feathering. These aren't techniques that have like a specific outcome in mind. They're like very execution focused, and you can use them to do a variety of things. But in the very beginning, you have to learn how to do them first. Intermediate ones will often ask questions like, what paint you use to get that effect? What technique you use to get that effect? They want to know about the building blocks of how you achieve a certain end result.
Right. And it's like, if you think about it from a kind of a different perspective, it would be like, I want to learn how to change the oil in my car, which isn't a thing that people really do anymore very much. But the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to need to know what are the tools you need in order to achieve your goal in changing your oil. And you're going to need to know what tool is used in what situation. So you need to familiarize yourself with the tools of the trade. And that's true of any artisan, craftsman, anything like that, is you need to be familiar with tools of the trade. So once you've gotten beyond just the basics, you're like, oh, there are a lot of different tools here. And I should start familiarizing myself with these tools. We often think of tools as a very tangible thing. Tools meaning what's the best paintbrush. Tools meaning what's the best paint brand. Tools meaning what's the best wet palette. Because that's it's a logical place for our brains to jump to. But more importantly than the specifics on those tools are the tools that you're learning through technique. The technique tools. And so as you're getting into intermediate, saying, I'm really enjoying this, I want to do it more, you will naturally start to say, okay, I'm going to start to realize different ways that these techniques can help me.
And I think we actually, I did this explicitly. I kept tools off of this list of intermediate 1, 2, and 3 because you can definitely be a beginner and own and use a wet palette or sable hair brushes or an airbrush. I don't think that ownership of specific physical tools is going to really like make you an intermediate or make you an advanced or make you a beginner even. So we kind of, these are all mostly skill-based like milestones.
Right.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. And by and large, any miniature paint brand that's on the market today, you'll be able to use. Part of that is like getting accustomed to what that paint brand does well and what it doesn't do as well. And that actually sometimes can influence which techniques you spend more time doing, right? If it's a very thin range that doesn't give you really good opaque coats, well, you're going to spend more time, building up with thin layers and maybe subtle blends and that kind of a thing, because that's what that paint does well, as opposed to it being able to wet blend well, because it's not going to give me a full opaque coverage. But I think we open the door to specifics in products that takes us too far off track of what I think is the core of leveling up through the intermediate stages of painting.
Mm-hmm. All right, what's the second bullet point, John?
Okay, the second one, this is also in intermediate 1, is starting to recognize things that are related to highlight and shadow, specifically things like zenithal highlighting. And what that means is just a surface is brighter towards its top than it is at its bottom, and that helps define its shape. And that is just from the sun above. And that is universally understanding that the entire surface of this cloak wouldn't all be the same level of purple. And the areas higher up on the cloak would be brighter than the areas that are below the cloak towards the bottom and in its recesses.
Would you say an intermediate 1 is still using acrylic washes to add in shadow and then embellishing that with highlights? Or is an intermediate 1 beginning to paint in their own shadows with this acrylic paint?
I think either one works. Either one is fine. The biggest thing with using things like the contrast paint method and using shades and washes is that you're doing that to get the same result, but kind of quicker, right? And it requires less mental thought process. But a part of going up in stages in the intermediate levels is recognizing what is the wash doing for you and the downsides it has. In many situations, you lose control. So as you are working up in the intermediate stages, one of the overarching things you're trying to do is gain control over all these different aspects of the painting process. And the more you realize that I have more control as I refine my skills, the more I see the downfalls of things that relinquish all control from me, but they achieve a decent looking result as the product was designed to do by taking that control away from me.
Right. So you know when to pull your punches. You know when it's not important that you like correctly resolve a shape on a model because it's like small or unimportant. That's definitely more of a kind of a full circle kind of advanced moment. I feel like in intermediate one, we're still using washes primarily, and you're still building up from there. I think later on is when you start to see people starting from the shadow color and then painting on the mid-tone in layers. I think that's a little bit more of a advanced technique. But speaking of, we're kind of starting to get into intermediate 2, which is a bit longer. The more advanced we get, the more like, I don't know, specific the bullet points become, I find.
Yeah, check boxes. So I do want to do just a quick like overarching kind of synopsis of intermediate 1.
Sure.
And what defines an intermediate 1 versus a beginner. And I think that can kind of help us to summarize these at each stage. So compared to a beginner, an intermediate 1 painter is kind of, instead of just reading the back of the book cover to see what the story is about, they have now opened the book and decided to delve into it. I'm going to commit to reading this story. And I know I've got a long ways to go. I know it's a 600-page book, but I'm beginning. And I don't know any of the characters yet. I don't know what the plot is. I don't know what the twists are. But I'm just having my eyes open and I'm going to be along for the ride. To me, that's a big part of intermediate 1. You're starting to look around and recognizing there's things, whether it's from watching YouTube videos, whether it's from checking out people's amazing works, whether it's just talking to fellow painters in your area, whether it's trial and error by yourself, is your understanding. As I look at my friend walking down the sidewalk in the daylight, that, oh, his coat, even though it's a black coat, is actually gray up by his shoulders, and it still reads as black to me. Why is that? And then you starting to just experiment or recognize these things and starting to pull them in a little bit, but you're not in the deep end by any means. You're just willing to start the journey.
Yeah, you have a sense of curiosity and exploration. You want to figure these things out.
Right.
In intermediate 2, I think one of the first things that maybe begins to happen is that you understand when to use various paint consistencies. So you've grasped some of those techniques you mentioned, layering, wet blending, glazing, etc. And then you start to change what those consistencies are. You recognize that, okay, when I wet blend, maybe it's helpful to have a thicker paint because thicker paint doesn't dry as quickly on the model, and that helps me wet blend better without having dry paint that I'm like trying to mix on the model at the same time I'm getting a blend. But also at the same time, you realize that, okay, I don't only wet blend massive capes, I can also wet blend this little piece of thigh plate armor. I can do a very small little surface, and I can maybe do it with thinner paint, or I can do it with less paint in my brush, not flooding the surface. You start to recognize that, you know, there are some rules and some guidelines with technique that they can be bent a little bit. And when you bend them, you get different results. And then you start to apply those different results to different situations.
Yeah. I remember back to when I was newer in painting, when I realized that different paint brands and even different colors within the same paint brand, I would have to add different amounts of water to them to get the consistency that I wanted to make them easy to apply, where they'd slide off the brush smoothly. And that is a key kind of understanding moment that leads you down this path. And this is the foundation of understanding paint is a tool, and that it is not a static tool that is only used in one way, and that is out of the bottle or out of the bottle plus one brush full of paint.
Yes,
right?
yes. That's a huge thing. When you recognize that not every paint needs to be thinned to be used immediately.
Right.
Pro Acryl, Reaper MSP, those paints can be used to base coat immediately. And if you just applied your blanket, you know, not to pick on Duncan Rhodes, but Duncan Rhodes' too thin coats like mentality of I thin the paint a little bit to consistency and then I apply it and I apply however many layers I need to get opacity. It's like, no, you can actually just start right away with the thick paint, not thin at all, because you begin to identify the appropriate consistencies for the various techniques you're doing. In this case, base coating.
Right. Yes. And this is the start of this, but this is the start of the journey where you realize that the thinning of paint is not just layer consistency and then really thin paint, that there's like 5 shades or more in between those. And you start to realize this, and when you start to experiment with different levels of dilation, then you start to realize the values and the use cases for those dilation and how they work in different ways over different colors. So this first step, this is a really big one, and we specifically put this in intermediate 2 because it is very key, and it is something that will stick with you to the pro level. Like, it is so foundational of really having a strong grasp on your paint as a tool and how you can manipulate it for your uses. But here is where you first start to have that aha moment with it and start to experiment. You don't need to experiment a lot with this at intermediate 2, but recognizing it and identifying when I'm using Pro Acryl paint and I'm doing a base coat, I'm not thinning it at all. But if I did add 1 brush of water or glaze medium to it, now it acts more like the GW paint does with 3 brushfuls of water. And so you're just like building this catalog of firsthand information and that you can draw on later. All right, next one in intermediate 2. It says, getting good contrast with zenithal undercoat, but struggling with the shapes/materials.
We should back up 1 click before we go over this one. In intermediate 1, I think people would begin to have an understanding of zenithally highlighting things. But when people, like I'm in a group called the Sepulchral Guard for my Patreon, and I always see this. When someone is like, not giving up, but they're trying to like learn how to paint something zenithally, and they're kind of painting things with the GW method originally. One of the first things I see is I begin to see shadows and highlights, but there's not enough contrast. And so eventually they figure out, okay, I need to go this dark and this bright with my highlights. But then the second problem happens.
Yep. Yes, and that is you're struggling with the shapes and materials. And shape, materials, and light are 3 key things that you will be building up to as you get closer to an advanced and pro level. And the more defined you are with those, the more refined your final product will be. So at intermediate 2, you're understanding the basics of how light works. You're understanding how to do a zenithal coat. You're understanding if I did a zenithal white from above in my prime, how to follow that, how to use that as my guideline. Even after I paint it over it with a base coat, maybe I'm able to still have the basic understanding of how much of this should be shadow, how much of this will be base coat. But the refinement of that balance is still not, you haven't mastered it yet. I remember very distinctly early on in my painting journey that I struggled. There was probably a 6-month period where I really struggled, where I kept losing my midtone. Did you ever go through that?
100%. When I switched over to starting from a shadow and then building up from there, that's the #1 problem I experienced.
Yeah. I'm losing what is the true color of the surface.
Yep.
Because it's like I lost the midtone. I see the shadows, I see the highlights, but the amount of midtone is too small, so I can't really tell what color this is. Mm-hmm. And this is a very common thing here, where it's like, I grasp that I need shadows and highlights. I grasp that it's brighter up here and darker down here. But how do I walk that edge of how much shadow and how much highlight? And how does the material affect that? That's still something you're working towards, but you've identified and you've been actively adding those steps to create more depth in your surfaces.
I want to ask you a question here regarding highlighting and shading things according to their material, but also like their 3D volume, like whether they're a cylinder or a sphere. Did you learn how to do either one of those things first? Did you learn volumetric highlighting first, or did you learn about material and how it affects like the highlights and shadows?
Materials second.
Okay.
I think it's more important to grasp the basics where you throw material out the window. It's easier, at least for my brain, to process. Be like, this is a cylinder. I need to understand how lighting on a cylinder works. And only when I understand that will I be able to notate the differentiation on if it's a cylinder made out of chrome or a cylinder made out of wood.
Right.
Right?
Yep.
I think that's the approach that will work best for most people.
I agree.
It's also easier for me to process too. Because if I think about this being chrome first and then a shape second, I just feel like I'm more likely to make dumb decisions in the painting process.
Yeah. All right. Next bullet point for intermediate 2, you're starting to experiment with paint mixing. So a lot of the options you have on your wall of paints aren't nuanced enough for you, and you want to get subtle variations in color. Maybe you want your shadow to be a little bit colder. Maybe you want your high to be a little bit warmer. Whatever that may be, the options that you own aren't good enough for like the level of creativity and uniqueness you're trying to employ on the model, and so you start to mix some colors up.
Yeah, and I think that this is something that it's the sooner you get into experimenting with this and making this as a regular part of your painting, the more happy you're going to be, because quite frankly, there are paint brands that do this where they have like triads or they have like 3 or 4 colors that they're like, it's the same fucking color and they just add a little bit of ivory to it or a little bit of a ice yellow to it or whatever, and it's just like, I don't need to grab 4 different colors of turquoise off my wall to paint this thing with that level of, subtlety. I need the one color and then maybe a rusty red for the shadow and then the brighter yellow for the highlight, and I can build it up myself, and I don't have to always rely on having the exact paint for the job. I will tell you, as somebody who owns way too many paints, I don't grab the warm yellow 1, 2, and 3 off of my shelf. I grab the one that I think is the strong one that I want the tone to be, and then I fluctuate with mixing. Even owning all those paints, it's still better, and it ends up turning out to more organic looking material if you get a little bit accustomed to mixing your paints.
Yeah. So. And I want to differentiate between 2 kinds of painters. I feel like the kind of painter that we're discussing about right now is the kind of person who probably paints single miniatures, right?
Sure.
Trying to get better. There is definitely an argument for, if you're wanting to paint an army, having pre-mixed paints, just because it's difficult to mix up the right volume of paint for a given step if you're painting 10 dudes, right?
Sure.
And also it fucking spreads out so much with a wet palette and then it dries faster. So it's nice to have those options when you need them. But like if you're trying to develop a color scheme for an army, dude, mix paints all day. And then try to find paints that like map to that color scheme when you want to paint a 10-man unit or a 3-man unit of bikers or whatever it may be. But just for posterity, we're definitely discussing the kind of painter that paints individual models, maybe to a display quality or whatever they define as display quality.
Just trying to improve, because you're painting one model at a time to improve. But there's a good point there when you're talking about painting a unit of 5 dudes or 10 dudes here. And I think color mixing is still very important there, but you go about it in a different way. At least I do. And the way that I found in my messing with things over time is that I pick whatever my midtone is. That's out of a fucking bottle. I don't want to fuck with that if I got a whole army to paint. I also know what's the highlight that I want this armor to be brought up to. That's from a bottle, okay? But if I want to have a little bit of a progression through that, a little bit of smoothness, I want my army to look a little bit nicer, I'm also going to do a 50-50 mix of both of those colors together as my first highlight. If I'm doing 2 highlights, it's base color, 50-50 mix, and then just the highlight color. And that will look so much better. And it's pretty easy to eyeball 50-50, and you don't have to be exact. Roughly 1 brush full and roughly 1 brush full, right? And it doesn't have to be exact. It will look the same across the whole thing. And you're not having to mix a color from scratch. And you're not having to know which 4 colors did I mix together and how much of the off-white did I use on this one. No, it's like, it's blue and then it's ice blue. And then in the middle it's 50-50 mix. That is how I do it with bigger things. But I do think why that's still valuable is that you're still spending time learning about color mixing while you're painting, a whole unit. And that will translate to no matter where your painting journey goes.
Absolutely.
Okay. We got 2 more on this one. Oh boy. All right. Intermediate 2. This is a heavy one. You got to check a lot of boxes. You want to get past this.
You want your fucking diploma?
Bro, we should have like little pins. This is like little Boy Scout pins.
Oh yeah. Intermediate 1, 2.
Yeah. Okay. Next one. Don't paint everything as good as you can. You pull your punches. Ooh, this is a good one, Scott.
Yeah.
You realize that as you're trying to improve, what you find yourself doing is like, you're not a master. You don't have it down so well that like every time you're painting anything, a boot on a model, you're just like, I'm trying to make this look as good as a boot as I can paint because I'm still learning. You get to a point, and this can happen in the intermediate, where it's like, not everything I paint needs to be painted to the best of my abilities for the model to still look great. And so you recognize that there are places you can pull your punches. I still do that all the time. Like, I'm just going to fucking contrast paint this fucking belt. Fuck that.
100%. I do the same thing.
Right? And the model is not going to be suffering for it because you know that not everything needs to be perfect. There's too many details in a lot of these models these days. I'm taking the things that I'm learning as I'm going through the intermediate steps here to make the important things look good.
Yeah.
But you realize that, well, not everything. After I just spent the last 2 hours painting belts and straps, the model doesn't even look that much better. Do I need to spend 2 hours painting belts and straps? No. I'm going to still improve as a painter, even though I'm cutting some corners because I'm putting in the time on the important sections.
This is not like a thing that you're striving to do. This is like just a natural reaction to getting better. It's like, it becomes annoying to have to paint boots really nicely, and then you realize that you don't need to do that, and it doesn't really impact the overall vibe at all.
Yeah, I think it's a good look at it like playing RPG. Every single model you finish gives you X amount of experience. Say it gives you 100 experience, right? And it's going to take you more XP every time you level up to get the next level. Because the first level is 1,000 XP, second level is 2,000 XP. It gets more and more. But each mini is only giving you 100 XP, regardless of how much time it takes you. As long as you are taking your time through the important things, are you going to waste more time on the things that aren't actually getting you XP at that point? The things that are getting you XP are not the boots and the belts. The things that are getting you XP is understanding the volumes of the big shapes, defining the more details on the face, figuring out how to paint a smooth cloak. Those are the things that get you XP. Not the fucking boots.
Not the boots.
Not the fucking boots.
All right, the last bullet point we have on intermediate 2 is recognizing that techniques have a lot of nuance. So to give an example, layering. When I first thought about layering as, say, an intermediate 1 or whatever version of that I was, I thought about layering as, okay, I'm going to paint the shoulder pad dark blue, and I'm going to paint like McCrag blue on it and like maybe keep 80%, or sorry, cover up 80% of that layer. And then I'll paint with a lighter blue and I'll cover up 80% of that layer. Okay, I'll do it one more time and cover up 80% of that layer. It's like, actually, with layering, you can cover up 90% of that first layer, 60% of that second layer, and 20% of that final layer. Everything about every technique can be modified, and that allows you to get different results. And I think layering is probably one of the bigger ones to highlight with it. I know I mentioned earlier wet blending and stuff like that and changing the dilution, but with layering, this is when you start to really get into like materials and like how much highlight, midtone, and shadow are on a given thing make it look like a given material. And so recognizing that everything is a shade of gray when it comes to especially an artistic medium like miniature painting, and like what changing those things affords you, what it allows you to do.
Yeah, that's is a really important one. That your nuance is a great word to use here. So at intermediate 2, you've gone from and this is specifically the last thing before we get to intermediate 3/advanced, And this is one of those ones that I think is kind of the tipping point where then you can start getting into the advanced things, is you've gone from proficiency of, I know I got to thin my paint this amount with this red paint, and I know I need to wick most of it off, and I know I'm going to pull my paint all in the right direction so it pools in the right place. So you're proficient with layering. When you're starting to understand that nuance and going down the path of mastery of that same technique, because you understand all the foundations and the important aspects, and now you're finding which variables that you can manipulate to your advantage.
Yep.
It's like a division problem of 5 divided by 3. Okay, that is, if you understand how to do division in math, then you'll understand how to find the answer. This is now adding variables to a division problem, but instead of it 5 divided by 3, it's 5 divided by x equals whatever 5 divided by 3 equals.
It's algebra, baby.
Yeah, this is algebra where you're finding what is the variable that I need to identify and tweak for my uses. A great example also with layering on this is like, I understand layering consistency. I understand how I push my brush a certain direction. I got the foundations down. Now, I found out that if I create my layers a little bit thinner, not super thin, but a little bit thinner, I push them up towards the peak of the shoulder pad on the Space Marine, I don't need to go to the next color yet. The first time I covered 90% of the shoulder pad. The next time I'm going to come back with the same color and I'm going to cover 80% of the shoulder pad. So there is this spot where just the first layer from this first highlight is showing, but there's another spot where there's 2 layers of that same color. And this creates a transition of smoothness of where one layer is now comprising 70% and then the other layer is 90%. So you're finding how you can manipulate how this technique works, how this tool works, how to approach painting faces works with shapes of the thing and utilizing that to your advantage. All right, we're on to Intermediate 3/Advanced. So do we want to try to do a quick synopsis of the high points of differentiating Intermediate 2 versus Intermediate 1?
Yes. So I think Intermediate 1 recognizes the structure and the rules and begins to fucks with it a little bit.
Yeah,
you know?
fucks with it.
Starts to mess with some of those rules, starts to push against some walls to see what happens. They're beginning to identify some ways that they like to change stuff up to get unique results, starting to develop maybe a little bit of a personal style, and really just test the limits.
Mm-hmm. Got it. You want me to talk about something?
Do you want to talk about something? Do you have something to add?
That was Intermediate. Were you just, I lost track of what you were saying there.
You wanted me to give a synopsis for Intermediate 2.
Okay, good. Because at first I thought you were starting with Intermediate 1 and then you get to Intermediate 2. I was like, dude, you're talking about Intermediate 2 stuff. Yes. Yeah, you are proficient in not everything. And I there's a little spoiler. Proficiency and mastery in all things are not required for you to get to a quote-unquote pro level.
Yes.
It is overarching when you look at your capabilities as a whole. Like kind of there's big buckets, and there can be things that are just laying in the trash outside the bucket, okay? And that's okay. You can still level up that way. But with Intermediate 2 as opposed to 1 is that you are starting to really develop your proficiency on a wider breadth of things. And because you're proficient, you are starting to push beyond that in a few areas. You're starting to recognize that there is a world beyond the proficiency, and you're starting to poke at those boundaries, like you said, which I think is a really important thing, where it's like, okay, I'm developing with my own education here that comes through repetition. That's a big part of it too.
So kicking it off for Intermediate 3 or Advanced, we kind of made these names up. This is one of your ideas, John, was the ability to create unique and visually pleasing color schemes with good composition. And so this is the ability to take the model and arrange the colors on the figure such that the model itself looks good, but also such that it draws attention to the appropriate places on the model. If you have neon orange as a spot color in your paint scheme, like you said, you're not going to paint the boots neon orange. That would be a bit of a goofy thing. Or let's say you have the color red. It's a very strong color in your paint scheme. There's a lot of it on your model. You want to introduce a little bit of temperature contrast, and so you start to shade other parts of the model with a blue. You're using blue in a subtle way to get contrast on the miniature of temperature because you have so much red on the miniature. You start to really kind of think about those choices.
Yeah. And a big thing here, I think, with advanced level 1 or advanced/intermediate 3 is that you are starting to look beyond just miniature painting as ways to learn. And this is a big part of that. Now, you can learn all of this solely through miniature painting YouTubes, through going to classes, through, joining people's Patreons and that kind of thing. You can learn this there, but the history of this stuff isn't actually in miniature painting. It is understanding. You're starting to grasp colors. You're starting to grasp color theory, understanding color schemes, and understanding points of interest. On a Rembrandt painting, if I were to say to you, what is the point of interest on this painting? You say, oh, it's this guy at the table with a loaf of bread. Well, how many other people in the painting? Well, there's 6 other people in the painting. Okay, why is that guy the focus? What is the point of this? And how does the rest of the painting, how it's painted, draw your eye there? When you start thinking about it that way, you can start thinking about your models the same way. Well, my guy is a monster with this big, nasty, gnarly head with these bunch of teeth, okay? And the most of the monster is all one surface. It's all going to be a purple monster, okay? Well, how do you create interest in this piece if it's all purple? And how do you draw your eye to the interesting parts of the model? And that's your use of color and your use of light. And that, starting to understand that. You're not an expert at this, you're not a master of this, but you recognize that how I choose my colors and where I place them and where I draw attention through a variety of ways of contrast is in my control. And I can start implementing that to make more impactful models, even if I'm using the same 4 colors as I was on this same model a year ago. I can make it more impactful.
You mentioned something that's interesting. What stage do you think a painter starts to look at other things as inspiration or reference material, whether it's your wedding ring as it has interesting reflections, a doorknob, a Rembrandt piece, another miniature? At what point do you start to look at those for inspiration? And at what point do you start to look at those and understand what's going on and what they're doing? I think those are 2 different phases, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I think in intermediate 2, you are starting to recognize specific things achieved in miniatures. I think you can, in beginner and intermediate 1, you can tell me which models you really like and look cool and look like they're well painted. As you're getting into intermediate 2, you can start to communicate what about them really stands out. Not even necessarily how they achieved it, but seeing it in models as you're painting models. And so you have a 1-to-1 comparison of like, when I paint yellow, it doesn't look like that. I can recognize that yellow on that shoulder pad looks really good. Oh, is it because he used that rust orange as the shadow color of the orange and it really made it pop and that kind of thing? You can start to see it there. I think that's why we have an intermediate 3 is the first bullet point we just talked about, is identifying in the world around you and identifying in other works of art that aren't miniatures and getting inspiration, or just simply saying, oh, that doorknob has this really strong kind of oval reflection on this top here. But the bottom, it doesn't just go all to pure dark. There's this other brown light, and the exact opposite spot of the doorknob is there was that brightest light, and understanding how that's creating depth of the surface. So when you start to recognize that, and again, this isn't a linear thing. You could be painting your first model and understand that because you have some kind of art background and stuff like that. But that just means there are certain boxes you have checked, maybe even as high as advanced 1. However, you don't understand the specific mediums of miniature painting. You don't understand the exactitude of detail work with a brush and being really proficient with that tool yet. You don't understand like how this 3D object is painted differently, even though you really have a good understanding of light and color. So it doesn't make you start at advanced, because you went to art school, okay? But there are certain aspects, this being one, that I think even if you have no art background, you'll start to see, and you'll be able to start to replicate or take inspiration from in your painting.
Yeah. And one thing you kind of touch on that you see all the time when someone who's like good at art but then tries to paint miniatures is brush control. And we mentioned it at the very beginning with a beginner trying to paint within the lines. But there are degrees of brush control. Can you paint eyeballs? Can you paint the highlight on a model's nostril? Can you paint like the individual finger joint like highlights on someone's knuckles and stuff like that? I think the more you advance through these various tiers, and I'm sorry that we're kind of going back and forth. This is the nature of not fully planning this out, but kind of planning it out. But yeah, as you improve as a painter, you begin to find greater degrees of control. You understand like what is necessary from your paintbrush, the consistency of the paint, how much paint is in the brush to achieve incredibly fine detail with not even a small brush, a medium-sized brush that has a sharp tip. So that's part of it as well.
Yeah. I've seen Sam Lenz paint with a big giant craft store brush.
Yes.
A level of fine detail in line work that is ridiculous, and he has no business being able to achieve with that kind of a brush.
With that speed, too.
With speed.
Yeah.
And I think this is actually a good time to bring up brush control. And there's no logical place for us to like put this on the list because it's a full spectrum.
Yeah.
At every single stage, one thing that will continue to improve for you will be your brush control. Mm-hmm. It's one thing that you can actively try to get better at it by putting yourself in difficult situations.
Yep.
Always painting the eyes, trying to get the finest edge highlights, trying to use small scratches to make this actual fur on the model look like painted on fur. There are a lot of things that you can do, but that will continue to improve kind of on its own as you do the repetitions. So it's harder for us to say, well, you got to check this box in order to get to intermediate 2. You have to be at this level of brush control. It's kind of a thing that just comes with repetition and using the brush. Now, that said, there is a level of ceiling to it that you can heighten your ceiling by being proactive and constantly pushing yourself in the details that you paint. However, you also gotta, this is the cold hard truth as well, it's very hard if the way you hold your brush is so important in how you are using the fingertips to control the brush. And you can be an amazing painter without them, but I'd say most of your control of our manual dexterity is done through the tips of our fingers, the edges of our fingers. So the more of your fingertips that you have touching the tight part of the ferrule of the brush, the more control you have for the tiniest little movements and the tiniest little lines and scratches. And just the tiny, tiny tip of the brush is the only thing that's touching this surface as I draw on this little half moon shape. The more your little fingertips and the more you're able to control the amount of vibrations, the more you're supported through more hands or fingers touching the model, touching your desk, and all that control, that will be something that you'll develop more and more from. Remember from starting my very first model where you're like, I don't have my arms touching the table. I'm like, everything's floating in the air. And I'm like, there's no way I can paint with fine detail that way. So like you'll find more ways to stabilize and to get that fine brush control as you go. But it is a part that is going to be a ceiling until you kind of break through that ceiling to a new ceiling.
Are you saying that people like Vince and Goobs with their claw grip are forever handicapped?
Yes.
All right.
I'm 100% saying that.
You know what Vince has to say to that?
Sure. Right. I know. So here's the thing. And actually, Vince is an amazing example of this. Vince is an award-winning, amazing painter. And I think he's handicapped himself.
I think he makes it work for himself.
He is like pushed what that vulture claw grip can do, and he's improving. So like he's pushing through because of that. I just think especially as you are the earlier on you are in your painting journey, he spent so many thousands of hours. It would not benefit him to change at this point because he'd have to basically like reset the clock. to relearn how to paint like a normal person. But if you're earlier on in your journey, like you should pay attention. How are you holding your brush? You know, it's not too late. You can try, even if it's not as comfortable, even if it's not what you're used to. You know, it's so weird too. It's like, because that's how we were taught to hold a pencil when you're a kid.
Yeah.
And holding a pencil is the same way you hold a paintbrush.
Yeah.
Effectively. Because 3 of your fingers, your middle finger, your pointer finger, and your thumb, all the tips of those are on there. Remember they had those little rubber things you had to put on the tip of your pencil so you could hold it correctly with 3 points touching? That's so why they teach you to do that, because you have the most control of your pencil, which actually helps your speed as well. And this is the same way. The more control over your brush is not only your precision, but it's also your speed. And so being able to hold that brush with the most control gives you speed and precision.
Yes. All right. Speaking of, shout out to Levi Huddleston, fan of the podcast. He made this shirt for me, which has a beautiful. He made a giant sticker of this one year for VincyCon, or for Adepticon, and he made a big shirt about it. Shirt out of it.
And it just says sure.
Just says sure. Vince's big old face on it. All right. On to the second bullet point for intermediate 3. What is it, John?
Okay. You have I don't say strong, but you have a good understanding of shape, volume, materials, and an understanding of non-metallic metals and object source lighting.
Well, maybe not like all of those things all at once, but those skills enable you to then do those things, right?
Right. You have to have an understanding, a baseline understanding of these before you're going to be able to graduate into a pro level. That does not mean that you need to be a master of OSL to be a pro level, right? You could not paint OSL at all and win the Slayer Sword, right? You don't have to know that, but you have to know the foundations of how light and shape and volumes, how those work, because if you do know that, then you have the foundational building blocks for you to be able to pick up OSL quickly when you wanted to do it, because you'll understand how light works. And if that light is coming from a different source, you need to understand how bright that light is, how far that light moves, what happens to that light the further it moves away, how does that light source and hit the shape that it's hitting, and how does that affect that from a separate angle from the main light source, and how do those two lights work together when they're hitting the same surface?
Right. So it's like a big composite skill. It's like there are many things you need to understand to be able to nail non-metallic metal and OSL, which is why we put it in this third category, because up until this point, you've been building the building blocks of the skills required to do these things. Like calling wet blending and NMM skills is kind of a misnomer, because one is, an understanding of smaller techniques is required to achieve NMM truly. So we put it in this last one.
Yeah. Yeah. It could be, understanding NMM is really only understanding light and shapes and material. That's all you're doing, right? And you can apply that light, shape, and material to literally every single thing you paint.
That is literally all miniature painting is.
Yes. That is all it is, right? And so once you understand those things, then you will be able to paint non-metallic metal. Why that is so unique is because the material is so reflective, and that makes it different than so many other things we see, where a cloth and wood and leather and even skin, their amount of reflectivity is pretty close. And when you're painting it at a small scale, you can kind of get away with painting them to how you paint them is very similarly, right? But you can't do that on a chrome gun, right? It won't read as a chrome gun, because the reflectivity, even at a small scale, and how light works against it, and how it reflects all these other colors in the environment, how that works is different. So OSL and NMM fall in here simply because they are examples of someone that really understands shape, volume, and material.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the last bullet point we have here is just kind of a progression of a previous one. It's mastering the nuance found in various techniques, which again is going to happen naturally as you experiment, as you try things out, as you try to figure out what works for you and what you want to achieve compared to other people in the hobby. It's just kind of like a nice bow tie thing. Like you're painting color schemes that are pleasant to you. You're painting accurately, at least as accurate as you want to. You are understanding how to like achieve the mid-tone you want to achieve given the material and the shape it is and the color that it is. You're kind of just, everything is kind of coming together in a pleasing way.
Right.
Also, I don't know if this goes in here. I wrote this down and then I think I got rid of it, but I feel like at a certain point, and maybe this is more of a pro thing. I'll keep it for pro.
Okay. All right. You keep it for pro.
Yeah.
Yeah. So nuance is a great word to use here because there's so much nuance, and you are not a master of all the nuance that is in miniature painting. That is one of the joys of this hobby. Is that level of nuance is deep as the ocean, and probably can't survive long enough to hold your breath to swim all the way to the bottom. But you can keep going down and keep going down. There will always be something new you'll learn, some new thing that really resonates with you. And that's why each of us paints differently, is the level of nuance and the directions we go are different. But you start to really recognize these levels of nuance, and you start to implement some of them as it happens organically in your own painting. You start to realize that, oh, a heavy glaze is different than a standard glaze, is different than a tint. So if someone just says glaze, that could mean a lot of different things. They say glaze some red into the cheeks. Well, what does that mean? If I am just going by intermediate 1 standards, I know I add a bunch more water, and then if I'm smart, I wick my brush so it doesn't flood the cheek, and then I put it on there, and the whole thing is super red and rosy. I did what you told me to do, but for the paint that I used and the color of the skin tone, it needs to be way, way, way lighter. It needs to be a tint. It needs to be there was a red object in the room next door. That's how red this is adding, right? And so you're understanding some of those nuances of all these different techniques. And it's not all of them. You don't need to understand all of them, but you're starting to implement a few of them, and that then opens the door for you understanding that there's such a breadth of more of these. And that sets you on a whole new learning track of nuance through the wide menagerie that is miniature painting. And that's the difference between advanced and pro, is you recognize it as an advanced. You start to really dig into it on maybe 1 or 2 things. And in pro, you're starting to implement that in most areas. Anytime, even before the paintbrush hits the model, you're thinking in nuance. And so that's something that's is a pretty paramount for an advanced miniature painting.
Sometimes the metaphors you use don't work for me, but the one you just used, I think, is fantastic. It's you called the nuance an ocean, and sometimes you have to go down to the depths to learn something new, but you always have to come back up. And I feel like that's the exact same approach that I take to the hobby, which is not the approach everyone takes, but it's like, okay, I'm going to dedicate a thing to learning a new technique, and I'm going to identify it's going to be difficult. It's going to be challenging. I'm probably going to paint worse than I'm normally able to paint. Like if I were to do OSL, I'd probably paint worse than I normally can paint. But eventually, I've done that. I've done my test, and then I'll come back up to the surface, and maybe I'll resume painting in the way that I knew how to paint. It's comfy, it's easy, I can go faster, it can be better, but I might also just include something that I learned from that deep dive. Mm-hmm. And then whenever I'm ready, I'm going to dive down deep and do it again. I'm going to go deep. I'm going to learn how to do hard cast shadows, and that's going to influence my other things, and then I'm going to come back up. And that cyclical, I can't say that word. Cyclical?
You got it.
That nature is great for at least how I learn. Mm-hmm. You do education, then you build confidence, and you just kind of keep doing that back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. If you're a person like Ben Cantor, you can just self-flagellate constantly and paint that way. But I guess for me, I like to every once in a while build some confidence that what I am doing is resulting in better paint jobs. I am being a better painter, or if I try something and I just totally fail, I'll go back to what I know how to do just to remind myself that I'm, okay at painting.
Yeah, he just chains a cinder block to his ankle.
Yeah, basically.
And then chucks it over the boat.
Right. Yep. Sink or swim, baby.
Yeah. But like every time you dive, your lungs are getting more acclimated to holding your breath longer and going deeper.
You gotta go deeper. Yeah, that's the thing.
You gotta go deeper, and then you come back up. Oh, you get a big breath of fresh air. But now you're treading water again, and you're comfortable here, and so you can. And that's good to always reset to where you're comfortable, because you'll fold in these things, sometimes really obvious things, sometimes more subconscious things that will allow you to grow at your standard treading water pace. But then you realize, like, I can just keep going down, and I'll be able to come back up, and I won't screw up all my painting forever, and I'll be able to be more comfortable being able to do that. I also think there's probably some part of this this analogy that works in terms of not just the XY axis of going down and up, but also out in different directions too. Haven't quite figured that out yet, but that totally applies.
I mean, yeah, the further away you get from shore, the deeper the ocean gets, right? So as a beginner, you're treading water.
Dude, there it is.
You're shin high.
Yeah.
And as an expert, you can't see the bottom, bro.
No. There'd be monsters down there.
Monsters. All right, let's define what a pro is.
And we didn't want this to be like this giant freaking synopsis of all these checklist of things of a pro, because I don't think that is a great way to do it. I don't think it should be a checkbox of all these things to make you a pro. And I don't think you need to be a pro at everything to be a pro. So
I think that is false. I think in order to be a pro, you must be a pro.
No, well, I guess that comes in your definition of what is a pro. I guess.
I mean, if you want to be a pro, you got to be a pro. It's the word.
I know, but like you could have won a painting award,
yeah,
and I could say, technically, I mean, you could call yourself a pro. It was a big painting award. That doesn't mean you're a pro at everything.
Yeah. Maybe it was just you and Timmy, the 16-year-old,
Yeah, I just stomped that kid in the Blood Bowl category. All right, but we wanted to cast a wider net.
Yes.
Right? We want it to be more of a state of mind. Right? If you think you're a pro, you don't have to learn any of this shit. All right, Scott, what did we come up with?
Subconscious decision making. When you're an intermediate and you're learning, you're taking pictures of models, reference photos, you're collecting images for various textures and weathering so you can refer to them while painting. I think when you get pretty good at painting, you need less of the assistant stuff. It's all just it's mostly subconscious. You don't got to think about how the light strikes this particular shin pad or the fact that this shin pad is a cylinder. That stuff is just intrinsic inside of you.
Yeah. So you still set up where your light source is going to be because you need that frame of reference. And then, okay, it's above and to the right of the model. And then I'm not thinking about, or you're not thinking about, I'm not saying I'm a pro. You're not thinking about the thinness of your paint. You're not thinking about the complementary color that will be universal throughout the scene that make it would sell, this to be the nighttime. Or you're not thinking about how a leather bracer next to the golden bracelet would be painted differently. You are actively thinking at certain points of the project. You absolutely should be. But there's this large section of time that you're not having to think about because through so much repetition and instilled learning that's become subconscious, you are making decisions subconsciously.
So I kind of alluded to something earlier, and I want to see if you had a similar experience. There was a moment when I realized that I was pretty good at painting models, and I'm curious if you've experienced this. I think for a long time, when you're an intermediate painter, you're very concerned with the outcome. You're concerned that the thing is not going to look good or that it won't look like what you are imagining in your head or something like that. When I realized that I was okay at painting models, it was the moment that I realized that no matter what I do with my skills and my decision making, by the end of this process, I will have a model that I personally think looks good.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. It does not matter. So I think I don't know. I kind of hit that, and I was like, okay, I think that could be like a sign that you are advanced or pro or whatever it is, a certain level of confidence.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of that is going through painting enough models under your belt.
Yes.
Where, like, you know, like, even if this thing fucking goes into a nosedive, and it does, it still goes into a nosedive for us.
I fuck up all the time, 100%.
But I know that I can right the ship, I can pull it up, and we can land this plane. Now, it doesn't mean that we're not going to lose a couple of passengers along the way, but we can land this thing.
Absolutely.
I'm walking away.
Yes.
Just fine.
Again, another great metaphor from the wise John Ninus. It's like flying a plane, you know? We can land the ship even if I run into a little bit of that mountain, you know? It doesn't matter.
Right, yeah. If we all crash on this snowy mountain and we have to eat each other,
I'm coming out alive.
I'm coming out alive. I'm going to be like, all right, I kind of fucked up on that one. I made it through. I'm flying again.
Lesson learned. Yeah.
Lesson learned.
I'm going to eat some people.
Jerry was delicious. I did watch Ravenous. I watched Ravenous again the other day.
I have not. I don't even know what that is.
That's a vampire movie, dude.
Oh, okay.
I did watch Ravenous.
Oh, add to the list.
It's fucking great. It's vampire cannibalism movie.
Oh, vampire on vampire action?
Let's see. I'm not going to give it away.
Okay.
It's a good movie.
Don't give it away. 1999.
99. Yeah.
Oh, it's got my boy in it. It's got fucking Guy Pearce, dude.
Yeah, dude.
Okay, I fucking love Guy Pearce.
Yeah, it's a good movie. You need to watch it. It's deranged. It's weird.
Is this like American Revolutionary War or Civil War?
Yes, it's post Civil War. Yes, Civil War, I think. No, Revolutionary War.
Oh my God. I think we need more Sleepy Hollow American Gothic horror, and this is that. So fucking perfect.
Yeah, you need to watch it.
All right.
I don't know, sidetrack. I did watch a movie this week. So yeah, I think that's a really important thing. And I don't think that necessarily, I think that actually falls somewhere in the intermediate range, maybe intermediate 3, where like you have a level of confidence that in your skills that the foundations are there, that you can right the ship, that you know the basics of lighting and coloring and just highlight, midtone, shadows to get you through some stuff. You can start from really wacky places too. And that's one of the reasons I like to start with just really wild undertones to my models, because it almost is like, I don't even know exactly how this is going to turn out, but I know I can get there because my foundations will see it through to the finish line. And then I got this weirdness that's going on in certain parts where this red shadow is coming out of the place where it's like, I know these are all warm undertones. It's going to be a cool contrast where I put cools down. It's going to maybe make my life interesting for other warms of how I deal with shadows in that regard, but I can get through that because my foundations will get me there.
Was there a point when you realized your ability to right the ship, or no?
There certainly was, but it actually, as you were asking that, I was trying to determine when it was, and it was a much later than I think I probably should comfortably say. Like, it's not that long ago.
I agree. For me, it was like a year and a half ago.
Yeah,
and I've been painting for like 20 years, almost 20 years.
Like, I look back to my for some reason in my head, I can timeline some things on my painting journey on the competitions.
Yeah.
I typically did one a year where I did the crystal brush that first year, and I won an award in the crystal brush. It was not then. The next year I did the creature caster resin beast thing, and I won first place in that, and it wasn't there either. The year after that, I did the big dragon for resin beast. That didn't happen. It wasn't there either. When I did the Golden Demons, it might have been around that first Golden Demon, somewhere in that year, maybe even after that, where it's like, I was like, something happened where I think you have to go through pushing yourself to like as far as you can go enough times to realize I have a little bit of a slack. I have a little bit of a parachute where I can always get it back to solid. Mm-hmm. And I think to me, a big part of what got me there was having to constantly paint for YouTube. I remember early on in painting for YouTube, I was very nervous on just about every video that I painted for, that I was going to paint it and it was going to turn out, and it wasn't going to turn out well.
Yeah.
And people were going to call me a shitty painter because the paint job was shitty, but I got to make the video and whatever. Some point around 1 year into YouTube, so maybe like 2 years ago, probably about 2 years, where I don't feel like I'm going to fuck it up at any given moment.
That makes a lot of sense, honestly. That was a pretty good list of skills. Thank you, Jonathan, for the question. It was a really interesting question. I really enjoyed kind of dividing up that gray area, as you called it. You have anything else you want to say?
It was really fun for us to just sit in front of the computer and just throw stuff out, because we were kind of like, gosh, feels like it's so amorphous. But as soon as we started throwing stuff out, and we didn't even put them out in order, we just kind of put out like, these are really important things that we think. They kind of naturally fell in line, and the list came out. And I think it's a pretty solid, it's not all encompassing, but I think it's a pretty solid litmus test of what do those kind of sub stages look like. Mm-hmm. And I do think the intermediate big gray area is the hardest to define, but it is the biggest zone.
Yeah.
So feeling like you're working your way through that can be difficult, because it's such it's just like a big dead ground that you got to walk across, and it's like no man's land, and you don't know how, looking back, it's foggy. You can't see that far behind you. You can't see that far in front of you. You know you got to keep going, but you don't have any frame of reference.
It's a foggy ocean, you're in waist deep.
Yeah, you're in the boat about to dive off, but it's foggy everywhere. There's a shark fin.
The boat's on fire.
The boat is on fire. Yeah, you can tie that cinder block to your ankle if you were Ben Cantor.
All the metaphors in one.
Just one of them. Yeah. Okay, that's all I got to say about that.
And welcome to the end of the podcast. Thank you for hanging out all the way to the end. We appreciate your devotion to TUP.
I don't know what that large exhale was for.
Oh, okay.
Was it an irony?
I don't know.
Are they devoted? Are you truly devoted?
If they're here this long, I would say they're devoted.
Have you shed blood for us? Bow down before your dark masters.
A way you could bow down is with your wallet. No. But if you do like the podcast and you want to support it, there are ways to do that with your dollars or without your dollars. If you have no money to spend, that's totally fine. We love it when you comment on our videos, share the podcast with your other nerd friends who might enjoy it, give us a review. You can also whitelist our channel on YouTube and watch our ads willingly. They play every 30 minutes, and we also appreciate that. But if you got some bucks to spend, you check out the Patreon, like John mentioned earlier. In addition to getting to submit models for feedback and also topics, you also get access to an extended episode, which is 20 to 30 minutes longer, where we talk about that feedback of those models, talk about other minis from other artists that we appreciate and models they've painted recently that we like. And we also talk about new things we tried in the hobby and where they went right and where they went wrong. So a lot of stuff you get from there in the Patreon. You can also pick up some of our merch, linked down in the show notes as well on Teespring. And I think that's about it for the ways they can give us their hard-earned dollars.
Yeah, you named it all. I do have a pro tip, though.
Pro tip.
You can break into all of your family members' phones, and you can start our podcast on YouTube, and you can play it on a loop.
Yes.
So then we get a lot of views, and then their algorithm just says they should watch TUP.
Actually, yeah, just fire up a playlist of every TUP episode and just run that night and day on repeat on as many devices as you possibly own.
Yeah, go to the office at work before everyone gets there, get on every single computer, and then do that on every single computer in your entire company.
Yes, this is not viewbotting, okay? These
are real people's computers.
People. Yeah.
You know, I think that Carolyn wouldn't mind it when she comes in, that her computer is just got TUP playing on loop.
Have you ever, like, either briefly or for a long period of time, shared your YouTube account with someone?
What do you mean? Like
I don't know.
Shared my channel with a stranger?
No, like even before you had a YouTube channel, like someone came over to your house and I don't know, they were like watching YouTube videos while signed into your account, like on your TV or on a laptop or your computer. And then like, have you ever had that before?
No, but I think I know where you're going with this.
Yeah.
Like your algorithm is fucked now?
It just fucks up your recommendations so much. Yeah. Okay.
It's like, no, I don't need to watch any more Mr. Beast.
Basically, that's what happens.
That's it. I'm just scared to what that would be. It would just be like HGTV shit and Mr. Beast.
It's not good. It's not good. Don't share YouTube with other people.
Okay. This is as much as an entertainment podcast. It is about life lessons.
Yes.
And Scott has just taught you one.
There you go.
Don't share with people. Just in general.
In general.
Anything. Your sandwich? No. Your shoestrings? No. your YouTube. No,
No,
don't share it.
absolutely not.
We're going to be back, I guess, in 2 weeks. Until then, we'll catch you on the
Flippity flop.